Hi, and welcome to AP European History Made Simple. My name is Paul Sargent, and today we're going to take a look at realism in art. This is a movement that started in the mid-19th century and really reflected the times. So we're going to look at some of the characteristics of realistic art, how you might be able to identify it on the AP exam, and then we're going to look at some examples of realistic art and explain a little bit about what the artists were trying to do. So I hope you enjoy this as we look at realism. So let's talk a little bit about background here. Well, first of all, there was a battle between neoclassicism and romanticism, which mirrored the battle between conservatives and liberals at the time. Realism has also always been a part of Western art. Trying to depict things as realistically as possible goes back as far as the Renaissance, where artists tried to use perspective and anatomically correct ideas in order to depict things correctly. But there was always an element of idealization to it. Painters never wanted to make things look exactly the way they were. They wanted to make them look a little bit better, much like we Photoshop things today, or they sensationalize things. And the development of the camera cannot be overemphasized as a real dramatic effect on art, because the artistic desire to depict the world as it is goes away with the camera making things so much easier. The camera was able to show things as they actually were. This is the first known picture taken from a camera, and here we have the first known picture to have an actual person. Now we've come a long way so that the selfie has become a thing, but the camera definitely changed the way art had to react to technology. So the characteristics of realism is they wanted a precise imitation of reality without alteration. Make things look exactly like they were, and only paint things which could be seen or touched. We're not talking about gods and goddesses, not religious themes, anything like that. We're talking about real world stuff. These artists also depicted lots of peasants and working class, which really went against conventions of the time. And so they were challenging the previous art movements in order to make something new. So here's our first piece of art, called the Third Class Carriage, painted by Honore Daumier. And in this picture, Daumier depicts the lowest class of people that are possible riding on this train. You've got an old woman sitting there, you have a woman carrying her baby, you have a boy asleep on the side right next to the old lady. And they're all cramped together in these quarters that most people with money wouldn't travel in. This is not the normal subject matter that people have been painting before, and so it flew into the face of convention. Also, notice when you look at these people, there's a very, very realistic depiction of their situation, their faces, and their clothing. That's what they're looking for here. Our next example of realism is entitled A Burial at Honore by Gustave Courbet. And this is considered one of the turning points of 19th century French art. So here this guy paints a picture of an ordinary funeral. In fact, it's a funeral of one of his relatives, with ordinary people involved and ordinary people standing around looking very ordinary. This is all about realism. The thing that critics hated about it is it was painted on a massive scale. This is a big painting. And that kind of scale was usually used for big history paintings or paintings of gods or something like that. Today, it's at the Orsay Museum in France. But here's the other thing that got people. It doesn't have the traditional romantic or Baroque, over-the-top, mourning, screaming, crying out loud kind of burial scene. The people are just standing there. And so as people started to appreciate what Gustave Courbet and other people were doing, they started to appreciate this realism form here. Eventually, however, and this is the ironic thing, years later, Courbet's political views himself had changed, and he repudiated his work, saying it was worth nothing. Next, we have the Stonebreakers, also by Courbet. You can see the muted colors here, the browns and all of this. There's a young man and an old man breaking stone. There's absolutely nothing romantic about this. This is realism at its finest. In fact, we don't even see their faces. Unfortunately, this painting was lost. It was destroyed accidentally during World War II. But it is a great example of what realism really was. Here we have The Gleaners. This is a painting by Jean-Francois Millet from 1857. And you have three peasant women gleaning a field of stray grains of wheat after the harvest. In other words, they're going around picking up all the pieces that didn't get picked up when the normal harvest happened. And it really wasn't received well when it was first shown. There's an ugliness to the poverty that he shows. These three women in the foreground are stooping up, doing back-breaking labor. We don't see their faces, but off back in the distance, we see a man, an overseer perhaps, who's sitting on his horse, watching the whole scene. It's a comment on differences in society, because he's not looking at them. They're not even worth watching. Next, we have another work by Daumier. Now, after the Revolution of 1830, censorship in France was lifted, at least for a little while, and lots of people took advantage of this lack of censorship. This is a great example of it. It depicts a scene that followed a riot in April of 1834. And during the riot, or after the riot, a family in a working class district had been murdered by government troops. Here, Daumier captures the scene after it was all done. And we look at the horrible scene of a young child and the family dead by government action. Sometimes art is used to challenge societal norms. And here's a great example of that. Edward Manet, who's more well known for his Impressionist work, painted this picture, Luncheon in the Grass, in order to show what realism was all about. Now, people really were offended by this painting because obviously the woman in the foreground is a woman, she's a prostitute, let's be honest. And here she is sitting with two clothed men in a field having a very good time. This is an absolutely taboo subject. And the way she looks out at us, almost daring us to tell her that what she's doing is wrong, was especially provocative to the eyes of the 19th century French. As if that last painting wasn't enough to try and upset the societal norms of France, along came Olympia. Again, here's Manet painting an obvious prostitute. But rather than looking semi-defiantly at us, Olympia is looking us directly in the eye with a show of defiance that she's not embarrassed about anything that she's doing as she sits there completely naked in front of us. Today, this is recognized as a great work, although it wasn't at the time, and it's on display in the Orsay Museum in Paris. So now we move to the less provocative. Rosa Bonheur painted the Horse Fair starting in 1852 and going on until 1855. She did a series of sketches to get ready for this painting in which she went to actual horse fairs. And while this was a very gender-based society, she actually dressed as a man so that she would receive less attention, so that she could get better sketches of these horses. It's a great example of realism and a great example of art that was actually appreciated at the time. Today, this is at the Metropolitan Museum in New York City, and they claim it's one of their best-known works of art. This painting, The Agnew Clinic, is known as scientific realism. Now, the way Eakins paints this is almost photographically real. Art historians have gone through and been able to identify almost everyone in the painting, except for the patient. Now, what was offensive to people of the time is that he decided to portray the patient partially nude. And here's this half-naked woman being stared at by a room full of men. That was not taken so well. In fact, when he tried to get it shown in Pennsylvania, it was denied. When he tried to get it shown at New York, it was denied. He finally was able to display it in Chicago's 1893 World's Columbian Exposition. And now our final painting, The Daughters of Edward Darley Boyd by John Singer Sargent. Here we have 4 young girls in their family's apartment. It was painted in 1882. It now hangs in Boston. And it actually hangs between the 2 blue and white vases that are depicted in the painting. This has undergone a lot of change over the years. Initially, people saw this as really a picture of children at play. But as Freudian psychology and modern psychology have evolved, art historians have started to look at this painting in a slightly different way. It almost seems like we're looking at different stages of childhood. The innocence of the girl in the foreground, moving to a sense of alienation of the near teenagers in the background. This is disturbing to some people. And it also is completely absent of any parental figures. It's almost as if we've walked in on these girls and we've disturbed them. And they're looking up to see what we're doing. So that's artistic realism for you. It's an effort to try and depict life as it really is. Take away the veil. Don't Photoshop. Let's see what people actually look like and what they actually do in their lives. Let's depict people that normal paintings in the past have not depicted. And let's react to the creation of the new camera, which is obviously going to change the way that painting goes on from here on out. In fact, realism is almost the end of the old world of painting. And as we move on into Impressionism and into modernism, we get away from traditional ways of depicting the world and into something a little bit deeper. So anyway, I hope you've enjoyed our look at realism. I hope it helps you on the AP exam. If you like it, please leave comments below here and subscribe. Till next time, I'm Paul Sargent. Thanks for watching.